All right, so you know how most of us only ever see prisons in, like, movies, right?
Yeah.
Well, today we're going to do a deep dive into maximum security prisons.
Oh, wow.
But we're not just looking at, one place. We're going global.
Okay.
We're going to see how different countries with, like, totally different cultures handle keeping dangerous people locked up.
Right.
And, maybe setting them on a path to, like, not doing that again.
Yeah. Rehabilitation.
Exactly.
It is really fascinating to think about how different countries approach that whole thing. What they consider humane or effective can be totally different.
Yeah, and for this deep dive, we've got a bunch of YouTube documentaries lined up,
Cool.
taking us inside prisons in, like, Singapore, Mexico, Bolivia.
Wow.
Oh, and even one right here in the U.S.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, giving us, those virtual tours and showing us what life is like behind bars.
So we're not just talking about the rules on paper, right?
Right, right.
We're going to see how these systems actually play out in real life.
Exactly, like the routines, the power dynamics,
Yeah.
even like the smells and sounds.
It's a completely different world.
Totally. So first up, Singapore,
Okay.
which is known for being super strict, right?
Uh-huh.
And what really jumped out at me was how much they focus on, like, control.
Control.
Yeah, it's almost like this perfectly choreographed ballet of discipline.
Yeah, their system is all about minimizing any chance of anything going wrong.
Right.
Like, from the second an inmate wakes up, every single thing is dictated.
Oh, wow.
Like, they have this master check where the guards make sure everyone is, like, responsive. Breakfast is served through this little hatch in the door.
Seriously.
Yeah, and even how they arrange their stuff in their cells is, like, super specific.
Wow, it's like they're trying to engineer good behavior just through, like, the environment.
Right, it's all about taking away any opportunity for them to make their own choices.
It's kind of wild.
But it makes you think about whether that can actually lead to real change, you know?
Good point.
Like, can you really rehabilitate someone if you don't give them any autonomy?
And get this, they even have inmates working in the kitchen.
Really?
Uh-huh, but they use chain tools.
Chain tools.
Yeah, and the food, well, let's just say it's not exactly gourmet.
Oh, I bet.
There was this one inmate who said, Wednesday afternoon, usually we eat meat or veggie.
Okay.
This one is like totally, if I point 0 to 10, I will say maybe 0 because it's very cold. And the meat also hard already.
Oof, that's a rough review.
Right.
It seems like they're trying to walk this line between rehabilitation and, like, absolute authority, like giving inmates some responsibility, but in a super controlled way.
Makes sense.
But is that enough to actually help them change?
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
And it's something we're going to be thinking about throughout this whole deep dive.
For sure.
Because, the success of any prison system really depends on whether it can actually transform people.
Absolutely.
Not just punish them.
Okay, so get ready for a complete 180 because our next stop is La Mesa Prison in Tijuana, Mexico. And here the focus isn't so much on, like, perfect control.
Okay.
It's more about just trying to contain the chaos.
Chaos.
Yeah, it's super overcrowded, under-resourced,
Uh-huh.
and it feels like anything could, like, explode at any minute.
It sounds intense.
Oh, it is. And La Mesa is like this microcosm of a lot of Mexico's problems.
What do you mean?
Like, you see the poverty, the corruption, the power of the drug cartels.
Right.
It's a totally different world from Singapore's, like, planned-out system.
No, it's more about adapting to the situation as it is.
Exactly. They have these cells designed for, like, 8 to 10 inmates.
Okay.
But often they're crammed with way more.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and there's very little yard time, barely any sunlight.
That's got to be tough.
Yeah, it creates this, like, pressure cooker atmosphere.
And how are the inmates dealing with that?
Well, we heard from this American guy named Taylor Elliott Howard.
Okay.
And he said, I'm a combat veteran. I'm a United States Marine.
Wow.
Over there, I'm a hero. Over here, I'm a villain.
That's heavy.
Right? It makes you realize that, like, what's considered right or wrong could be totally different depending on where you are.
It's about perspective.
Exactly. And then you have the prison director, this guy named Acevedo.
Okay.
And his whole philosophy is about maintaining 100% control.
Control.
Yeah, like using force if he has to prevent gang violence.
It sounds like he has a tough job.
Oh, he definitely does. In a place like La Mesa, any sign of weakness can lead to, like, a full-blown riot.
Right.
So it's all about keeping things in check.
Not so much about rehabilitation.
No, not really. It's more about just survival at that point.
It's a completely different approach from Singapore.
Totally. And there was this one cartel killer who said something really chilling.
What was that?
He said, I used to have an amazing life with my family, plenty of money.
Okay.
In prison, you don't tend to get enough, and it's usually awful.
It makes you think about the choices people make and what leads them to prison in the first place.
Yeah, like the path to crime isn't always simple.
Right.
There are often all these, like, social and economic factors
It's
involved.
complex.
Definitely. Okay, are you ready for something even crazier?
I think after La Mesa, what could be crazier?
We're going to San Pedro in Bolivia.
San Pedro.
And this place is like nothing you've ever seen before.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's not just a prison, it's like its own little society.
What?
Yeah, super chaotic, a reflection of like Bolivian life, but inside these prison walls.
Wow. Okay.
And get this, the inmates are in charge.
The inmates are in charge.
Not the guards.
How is that even possible?
Well, they have these guys called delegados.
Delegados?
Yeah, basically they're like the prison bosses.
Prison bosses?
Yeah, so new inmates have to pay them an entrance fee.
Seriously?
Uh-huh. They settle disputes.
Wow.
And they even control the whole internal economy.
That's wild. It's like a government within a government.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is that this whole system, like, wasn't planned.
So how did it happen?
It just kind of evolved out of necessity.
Assassin.
Yeah, like the prison is super under-resourced, so the inmates had to create their own way of doing things.
Makes sense in a way, I guess.
Right. It's a prime example of what happens when the state can't maintain control.
So it's like order out of chaos.
But with its own set of problems, obviously.
I can imagine.
We talked to this inmate, Carlos,
Okay.
and he was saying, this place, this is just weird. Scary. Some of the other guys have already told me stories I kind of know. Well, they should remember. He's the boss of all bosses here.
Okay.
Convicted of 4 murders.
Yikes.
Right. You could just feel the tension.
It's like a whole different kind of justice system.
Totally. And remember how we were talking about rehabilitation?
Yeah.
Well, in a place like San Pedro, it's hard to even define what that means.
Because the lines are so blurred?
Exactly. And then there's the fact that families live inside the prison.
Families.
Yeah, like kids growing up in this crazy environment.
Oh, wow.
It makes you question the impact on, like, everyone involved, not just the inmates.
It's a whole different level of complexity.
So we've seen these 3 drastically different systems, right? Singapore's super controlled order.
Right.
Mexico's struggle to contain the chaos.
Uh-huh.
And then Bolivia's inmate-run system.
It's amazing how different they are.
I know, it's wild, right?
What do you think these systems say about the countries themselves?
That's a great question. I think they're like these distorted mirrors reflecting each country's values and anxieties.
Yeah, like their fears about order and control, their priorities, their beliefs about crime and punishment.
Exactly. And in the end, they're all wrestling with the same fundamental question.
Which is?
What do we do with the people who break the rules?
And what does that say about us?
Exactly. So we've seen like the blueprints of these prisons, right? The routines,
Yeah.
the crazy differences in how they operate.
Uh-huh.
But what about the people, actually living this?
Right, the human side of it.
Exactly, like the inmates, the guards, even the families who are kind of caught up in all of this.
It's easy to get lost in the big picture, the systems and the statistics.
Yeah.
But when you focus on the individual stories, it really hits you.
It does.
Like, these are real people dealing with stuff most of us can't even imagine.
Totally so in Singapore, where it's all about control.
Right.
Even the ways the inmates cope are kind of telling
Oh,
you.
wow, so...
Well, remember, they have those work programs.
Yeah.
The carefully selected inmates handling those kitchen tools, even while chained up.
Right.
It's almost like this experiment in trust and rehabilitation.
Yeah, like giving them responsibility, but with these super strict limits.
It's
saying,
true.
we believe you can be more than just your worst actions.
That's a good way to put it.
But it's still at risk, right?
Oh, definitely.
And then think about those long weekends they have in Singaporean prisons.
Oh, yeah.
No work programs, just isolation in those tiny cells.
It's got to mess with your head.
It has to, right? Like the constant pressure of being watched, even in your own thoughts.
It's intense, and it makes you wonder, is that really helping them?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, like, can you really rehabilitate someone without addressing their social and emotional needs?
Isolation can have the opposite effect.
Totally. Then you have La Mesa,
Right.
where just surviving feels like an accomplishment.
Yeah, these conditions are brutal.
The crap cell, the lack of sunlight, it's like this constant simmering tension.
And in that kind of environment, just connecting with another human being becomes so important.
Absolutely. It's like holding on to your humanity.
Exactly. And even in those tiny moments of connection, you see people's resilience,
Yeah.
sharing stories, finding humor in the darkness.
It's amazing, right?
It shows that even in a place like that, people still have the capacity for empathy and kindness.
And it reminds me of what Taylor said, that American inmate.
About being a hero one place and a villain somewhere else.
Yeah, it makes you question, like, what is right and wrong, really.
It's not always so black and white.
Definitely. And a lot of these guys are in prison because of circumstances,
Right, like poverty or trauma or lack of opportunity.
Exactly. And we have to recognize that if we want to create a better system,
Absolutely.
okay, and then there's San Pedro.
Oh, yeah, the inmate-run prison.
It's wild, right? Like, they created this order out of pure necessity.
It's a prime example of what happens when the state fails.
Yeah, and it's not pretty.
No, the strongest and the most ruthless rise to the top.
And justice becomes this, like, twisted version of what it should be.
It's a reminder that even without formal structures, humans will find ways to organize themselves.
Yeah, but not always for the better.
Definitely San Pedro really forces you to confront some hard truths.
Yeah, like about power and control and the limits of human nature.
And even in a place like that, you see families.
I know, it's crazy, right?
Kids growing up in a prison.
It makes you wonder what kind of impact that has on them.
It's heartbreaking to think about.
So we've seen these very different systems, but there's one thing they all have in common.
What's that?
Prison life takes a toll.
Oh, yeah, no matter where you are.
The isolation, the threat of violence, the uncertainty, it all adds up.
We know that even short periods of solitary confinement can have really bad effects.
Right.
Imagine spending years or even decades like that.
It's almost impossible to comprehend.
The sensory deprivation, the lack of human contact, it can break you.
And meanwhile, life outside keeps moving on.
Exactly. It's like being stuck in time.
It makes you wonder what happens to hope in a place like that.
And that brings us back to the question of rehabilitation.
Yeah, like what are we trying to achieve here?
Are we just warehousing people, or are we actually trying to help them change?
It's a big question, and if we want to reduce crime, we have to do more than just punish.
We have to address the root causes, the trauma, the social and emotional needs.
And what about the people who do get released?
Right, going back to the outside world after all that time can be incredibly difficult.
Absolutely.
It's like learning to live all over again.
And a lot of them end up back in prison.
Sadly, that's true. The system often sets them up to fail.
So what's the point then?
That's the question we need to be asking ourselves.
Are we trying to break people down or build them back up?
Is it about revenge, or is it about restoring them to society?
It's a tough balance.
It is, and it's something we need to think about as we shift our focus to the United States.
Okay, so next up we're heading to Pelican Bay,
Pelican Bay.
a supermax prison in California.
That's known for its use of solitary confinement.
Exactly, and it's a really controversial practice.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to take a close look at that and see what it tells us about the American justice system. All right, so we've seen what prisons like in Singapore, Mexico, and Bolivia.
Yeah, some pretty intense stuff.
No kidding, but now it's time to bring it home.
Okay.
We're going to take a look at our own system here in the U.S.
Makes sense.
So we're heading to Pelican Bay State Prison in California.
Pelican Bay, that's a supermax facility, right?
Yep, and it's known for this practice of solitary confinement.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
It's basically keeping inmates in isolation for, like, long periods of time.
It's pretty controversial.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That's a tough one to wrap your head around.
It really is. I mean, try to imagine you're in this tiny cell 23 hours a day.
Oh, wow.
Just you and, like, 4 concrete walls.
And your only interaction is with the guards.
Right, like for a few minutes a day.
It's like sensory deprivation.
Exactly. And that kind of isolation can really mess you up.
No doubt studies have shown that it can lead to, like, severe anxiety, depression, even hallucinations.
Wow.
Yeah, it's considered torture by a lot of human rights groups.
And the thing is, Pelican Bay isn't some, like, outlier.
So it's part of a larger trend.
Yeah, in the U.S., we rely a lot on, like, harsh punishment and isolation.
As a way to deter crime.
Right, but is it actually working?
That's the question, isn't it? And a lot of evidence suggests that it might actually be making things worse.
How so?
Well, think about it. Isolation doesn't really address the root causes of crime.
Right.
And it can make existing mental health problems even worse.
So it's like a vicious cycle.
Exactly. We isolate people to punish them, but it might actually make them more likely to reoffend when they get out.
Because they're even more messed up than when they went in.
And less equipped to handle life outside.
It's a tough reality, and it raises some big questions about the whole purpose of prison.
Like, what are we trying to achieve?
Are we just locking people away, or are we actually trying to help them become better citizens?
It's a debate that's been going on for a long time.
For sure. And the impact of mass incarceration goes way beyond the individual.
Right. It affects whole communities, families.
It can tear apart the social fabric.
And it disproportionately affects communities of color.
Absolutely. So we've seen these different prison systems around the world.
Yeah, from strict control to, like, total chaos.
And even here in the U.S., we're grappling with some tough questions.
About punishment rehabilitation.
What it means to be a just society.
It's a lot to think about.
It really is. But these are conversations we need to have.
If we want to create a system that actually works.
That's a good point. It's not about finding easy answers.
Right.
It's about being willing to ask the tough questions.
And to challenge our assumptions.
Exactly. So that's it for this deep dive into the world of prisons.
Wow, it's been a journey.
It has from Singapore to Mexico to Bolivia to right here at home.
And we've seen how different cultures approach these really complex issues.
It's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
And that every system has its flaws.
Definitely. But hopefully this has given you some food for thought.
Yeah, keep those critical thinking caps on.
Absolutely, because the conversation doesn't end here.
Right.
So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep questioning the world around you.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Anytime.
And we'll see you next time.